So, I've just finished watching season 2 of Mythic Quest. I've watched all the episodes over the course of about 2 or 3 weeks. And as the title will tell you, I think this show is incredible. This is the first truly great show about the games industry. Yeah, I mean there's really no comparison to me. The last show that I can think of that even came close to talking about no, there's nothing. I'm thinking about like pure ownage for those of you old enough to have seen that. But this is just on a completely different level. No offense to pure ownage at all, but you can't talk about these two shows in the same sentence. Mythic Quest is the most ambitious show that there is about the games industry, and like as you watch it, you think, man, when Rob McElhenney talked about this the games industry being a prime area where like there's so many stories to be told, but where we haven't seen shows. Um, there's bits of South Park that address some of the more interesting parts of gamer culture. As they've happened, little bits like Gamergate or World of Warcraft or whatever. But there's never been a show that just takes every issue that affects gaming and makes the show all about that and creates such an interesting, compelling story to go alongside it. I really can't effuse enough about this show. If you have really any interest in the games industry at all, watch this. Now, I do have some caveats, and things that you may think as you start to watch the show. I've already had a friend tell me that they don't watch it because it's Ubisoft. Now, I can understand that. I can also understand, especially in recent days, not wanting to watch it because there's a connection with Blizzard. In in the show, you will see clips, cinematics from various games taken from Ubisoft titles and from World of Warcraft cinematics and so on, which I assume have been sort of lent to the show so that they can be shown as cinematics of the fictional game Mythic Quest without having to build entire cinematics, obviously just for the show, which would be a bit insane, even though the show is quite insane. For my part, I'm not really going to talk about Blizzard or anything today. That would be far beyond the scope of this video. What I will say is that they are producing it. They are not the writers. They are not the creators, the hearts and minds behind this show. There are many hearts and minds behind this show, not least the actors who are really great choices. Just a really great, well, I don't want to just diffuse about the show. I want to critique it a little bit more and go a bit more in depth on my thoughts for problems the show might face in terms of getting people into it, which I would say it's difficult to understand just from watching a few episodes of the show, especially the early episodes, like what it's doing. I would say that the more you know about the games industry, the more you're going to enjoy this show. Which is why I'm kind of surprised that it hasn't taken off more. I was surprised that I hadn't heard about this show until it came out it was already out with almost the entirety of the second season by the time I'd heard of it. But when the show starts, you don't. It comes across in a lot of ways as a cheesy sitcom that's nothing special. And in a lot of ways, it is a cheesy sitcom. One thing I'll say about the show is that it's very sincere in a lot of ways. This is a very heartfelt show, and at times it dips over into saccharine, and not everyone will like that. There are times in the first season, there were times when I thought, what does this show want to be? Does this want to be a comedy or a drama show? And there was a time when I held the opinion going into season two that perhaps the comedy of this show is hurt by the attempt to be a dramatic show, and the drama of the show is hurt by an attempt to be a comedy show. This isn't quite as apparent in the first few episodes. In the first few episodes, it is very much just a comedy show, just a kind of a regular sitcom. You get these cheesy, exaggerated characters, these personalities that don't necessarily come across as real people. They are caricatures for the purposes of comedy. But it's surprising how well they are lent to drama and and just these very, very interesting stories. I think that is what really interests me the most about the show. It's a funny show. There are real laugh out loud moments. There are some really great characters and some parts that I just love purely and innocently on their own basis. But what makes me say this show is incredible, what makes me say that if you're into games, you need to watch this, are the stories that have real insight into the games industry and to an extent the entertainment industry in general. Um, I will single out one of, if not the best episodes of season two, which probably obvious to those of you who've watched the show or if anyone here has made the show. Backstory. Backstory is an episode that centers on a writer. Backstory begins in 1972 and it goes into the writing industry, into how young writers are able to break in and make it. Isaac Asimov is in the episode, for instance, and it's a real interesting look at just fiction in general and science fiction because that's obviously very connected to the games industry. Games, I think it's fair to say, relative to non-gaming entertainment, we are highly represented by fantasy and science fiction. People who tend to like fantasy and science fiction tend to be a lot more open towards games. And this episode takes on the idea of what if there's a next kind of fiction? What if we shouldn't be trying to write games with these static linear stories? And this is the even before this episode, I'm very on board with this opinion. Those of you who know me that know one of my pet gripes are PS4 games like God of War and Last of Us, who try to kind of be an HBO show. They try to be this isn't a game, this is a gaming experience. But they present very linear, very cinematic stories. Whereas to me, the most interesting stories in gaming come from RimWorld. They come from Shadow of War. They come from these emergent stories, and that's still emerging. We're still innovating very heavily in that area. I think we're almost plateauing on technology in terms of how much better technology can make games. The jump from SNES to N64 was a huge one, and it was right then to focus on gameplay and what new things we could do with gameplay with the technology. But we're at the point now where gameplay isn't really being affected by technology in the same way. We can do kind of most of the things that we would want to do with gameplay with the technology and tools we have available now, and it's becoming easier and easier than ever for new creators to be able to see their vision and make it. That is more a case of imagination. Imagination is going to be how we move forward and innovate. And one of those areas that's really ripe for growth is narrative choices. Look back at games like Telltale games and people thought they were the pinnacle of narrative games, the gold standard. And I think a lot of you would agree with me today in saying that's kind of ridiculous to say today, but especially having completed any Telltale game and realizing that your choices really don't matter. Um, I think there is an intersection of narrative and choice that for me is most interesting to see in role playing games, tabletop role playing games, which are something I've really gotten into in the last few years. I've become a big tabletop role player, and I think it's something. It's a very obvious choice to me. I ran an online writing based role playing site for many years, and ran sites before that, and was part of many for years before that. So I've been in that for at least a decade of my life, um, closer to 2 decades now, really. Hell, actually, if you count me role playing on fucking Neopets, then it goes back until I was quite a young boy. So yeah, and recently I've gotten into tabletop role playing, and I think there's such an interesting intersection between our true personalities and the characters we're playing, and the intersection of performance of a sort of scripted nature and this emergent, this improv uh, part of storytelling that's part of Dungeons and Dragons and other role playing games. Now, that was a quite a long tangent, but in that excitement, you should hopefully understand that I'm excited about Mythic Quest because Mythic Quest is talking about these kinds of stories. It's delving into these topics that no other show has delved into. And we're in the turning point of the era now for games. Games have become a bigger industry than any other in terms of money. Um, and I'm sure many of you, like me, you've got, I had two parents that had no interest in games. That I had obviously I had a very big interest in fantasy as well, and I was told by parents, write something real. Don't waste your time on video games. I was heavily discouraged, unfortunately, from pursuing the path that I am meant to take. And that's led me on this very winding path to where I am now, making YouTube videos. Dende, what's he up to? Yeah, that's led me on this very winding path to where I am now. And, it's an interesting path. And I'm so glad that I can begin to see shows like this being made. That there are so many stories in this show that I would like to go into, and I'm going to go into a few. One of the early topics is neo Nazis choosing to play this game and making it their chosen game, and how do developers? You're looking at Dende. How do developers solve these conundrums? We're increasingly seeing developers become overtly political. We're living in a very divisive age with a lot of new ideas flying around. New ideas are fighting old ideas, and we're still figuring things out. And how do we navigate that landscape as public figures and as game developers who are trying to support the right thing, or there are others who are just trying to stay neutral and not get cancelled? All of that is addressed very openly in Mythic Quest. And one of the things that I think people are really going to like watching this is that you're probably going to be represented on the political spectrum by a character in the show, assuming you're not like an extreme far right person, um, because you do have some of the stuff that people are going to roll their eyes at. Dende, go on then. Some of the people, yeah, there are things that people are going to roll their eyes at in terms of there's a lot of talk about social justice topics in this show. There's one character in particular played by Ashley Birch who is sort of the face of young people and new ideas about gender and things like that. She's kind of the face of that side of things in the show, so that's very much represented. But you also get the kind of other characters calling her incredibly annoying and criticizing her, and she's not an avatar for political ideas. None of the characters in this show are political avatars. They're all characters with real character flaws in their own right, exaggerated for being a show and being comedy. I think with all fiction, there's a spectrum of how much you abstractify things in order to make it legible. People in real life don't necessarily have the defining characteristics that characters in shows and films and books have. Look at anime as an example of abstractification gone to the extreme, where a character can have an entire personality trait that's just, I like food, and that's the whole character. We don't go that far here, luckily. There's a certain level of abstractification. But on the other end of the spectrum, you have characters who have more conservative points of view. You have very pragmatist characters, and you have a kind of central tension in a lot of ways of the, the questions of gender in gaming and game development. And that's addressed, I think, in the fairest possible way. If you're watching this, it's almost certain you're going to have your point of view represented in some form by some dialogue in the show. And I love what they're doing. They're very self-aware about everything they're doing, which, if you've watched Always Sunny, this is a lot of the same people who've made Always Sunny making that show. And I will also effuse about Always Sunny, just an incredibly great show and funny. If you're hoping for a show, if you're a fan of Always Sunny and you're hoping for a similar show, this is not it. They are very, very different shows. And I was perhaps going in hoping for something a bit more irreverent, a bit more Always Sunny, but I got something completely different, and I'm very happy with what I've got. Another topic that the show talks about that I don't want to go into too much is the question of money and producers and art and creativity, about following your dreams and about the struggles that come between wanting to make something pure, doing what you want, and the pulls of money, the pulls of producers and ever expanding companies and staff bases, and what those people want, because they're people too. And there is one episode of season one that is all about this, which is called A Dark Quiet Death. And anyone who's watched the show will know that A Dark Quiet Death is a masterpiece in of itself. It's actually something that I've shown to people as almost just a short film, because A Dark Quiet Death has absolutely nothing to do with the rest of the continuity of the show. Let's talk about other things. It talks about the new forms of game journalism and media in the form of streamers and the power that streamers have. It's almost prophetic to look at some of the episodes from season one of Mythic Quest and then look at what's happening now with World of Warcraft and Final Fantasy XIV, where there's a huge exodus of players from WoW to FF14, and a large part of that is, let's be honest, a large part of that is because of Asmongold. Streamers have that much power. Games live and die by the choices of streamers now. It talks about overtime in gaming. It talks about crunch. There is some very good running jokes with the art team in season two that just crack me up every time. Just whip up some portraits, do this. Oh, we don't want to use that anymore. I don't. A lot of this I'm saying from the perspective of, I want you to watch the show, and really, if what I'm saying is interesting to you, probably just go and watch the show now. But if you still want to hear more of what I have to say, there is more. We deal with hackers and their influence on the game, how they affect the game, and the interaction with the community. This being an MMORPG, which I think the framing as an MMORPG in this show isn't that important. I think MMORPGs are simply just a really great framing device for a show that can cover every aspect of gaming. Because MMORPGs are so vast and so expansive, and they are developed continually in the public eye. So we can have that ongoing drama, whereas with a normal studio, there's a very, very long development cycle, and then there's a release cycle and possibly post-launch updates, which is a whole nother topic that my first video on this channel is about. And I will be doing a podcast on this topic soon with my friends Killjoy and my friend Don Hayes over on the Gamers Gambit podcast. So I will put a link to that. Shameless plug. Anyway, we talk about the pandemic and how that's affected things with remote working. To a limited extent, there's one episode that really focuses on that. We talk about monetization and gambling systems. We talk about less gaming related, but we talk about workplace relationships. And I think most interesting to this show, I've talked about a lot of topics, but by the end of the second season, the thing you will care about most in this show is the characters, these character arcs. Because I think one of the best things this show does is show that among the politics, among all the gender politics and everything happening, you can say that just because you put a woman in charge doesn't necessarily mean that all the problems are fixed. That there's suddenly no workplace toxicity. That that it's as easy as that. Of course, it's not. And these characters are very flawed. They are humorously flawed, but there are moments when the show goes into a heavy place, or that might hit a little bit too close to home for some people who've worked in the games industry. And yeah, there are heavy parts, and there are real instances of workplace abuse in this show. And I don't want to tell any more about the show than I have done. So all I want to do is effuse about what a great show this is. And I want to say that if you have any interest in the games industry at all, you should watch this. And there might be folks out there who've watched the show and have a very different opinion than me. And I would love to hear what your opinions are. If you have any links to videos of your own, if you want to post them below, your thoughts and opinions, I'm happy to approve those in the comments. Or if you just have some opinions you want to share in the comments below, go for it. Hit me up. I'm happy to have a discussion in the comments. Other than that, that is about everything I have to say on that topic for now. But I am very much looking forward to the next season of this show. I've been Egregious of Egregious Games. Farewell.